Civilly Disobedient Media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network, at coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, and on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. Well, the word understatement would be a polite term if I were to tell you that the last year and a half have been extremely stressful. And I want to be careful tonight because the folks who have gotten COVID, many of whom are suffering long-term consequences, and or particularly the family members of those who have passed, need to always be in our thoughts, our prayers, and our actions. But at the same time, there is clearly a segment, if you will, of our community here in Rhode Island and around the country that has found themselves under incredible stress. And it's gone through multiple stages, beginning with the onset of COVID, going all the way back to December, January into February of 2019/20. First responders, as they become to be known, essential workers, that essentially we morphed into, have been on the front lines. And we need to take a moment and remember the days, particularly early in 2020, when those folks were reduced to wearing trash bags and dishwashing gloves and, in what became known as a rather unique version of PPE. And there was so much unknown at that point. We had no real idea as to the source of the disease, how it was transmitted. We just know that we saw a lot of people in severe distress, and a number of our friends and neighbors and relatives and just people we knew from our lives were passing away. Now, imagine this. You are the quote-unquote first responder, and now, as we know, essential worker. And you've been tossed into the middle of this. Now, just anecdotally, I worked my way through high school and a little bit into college as a hospital orderly. And my late mom was a nurse for nearly 40 years. And to say that helping other people is essentially part of these folks' DNA, again, it's the obvious now. And for so many cases, nurses, CNAs, orderlies, food preparers, mental health workers, caseworkers, thrown right into the middle of this. So again, the first stage is the stress of not knowing what it is. Then the stress of being surrounded by pain and death. We moved on as a society. Technology jumped in. We have a vaccine. And that's a question that's in a separate debate entirely. And then, though, imagine that you find yourself in a position where you may or may not have medical reasons and or moral objections or concerns about taking this vaccine. And again, it's too easy to dive into the realm of the cliche. We virtue signal, we pro clutch, all the terms, right, on those who are in those positions. We held parades, we had commercials, we love you, first responders. And then slowly, as technology finds treatments, and then there's a vaccine that's offered up. And you find these very same folks becoming, if you will, a political football. And what I mean by that is that there were careers that were chosen to be the object, of course, now of the much debated, and in many cases much loathed, vaccine mandate for healthcare workers. Now, there is no other segment of society right now that's subject to that. And again, I'm not going to dismiss the philosophical or medical concerns of those individuals. People know me that I believe firmly in body autonomy. One gets to choose what one wants to do with one's body. However, now, allegedly, I'm sort of a reporter. I'm Switzerland, right? I need to be telling both sides of the story. But our special guest tonight is reflective of a completely different side of the story. And that is, well, what do we do for these folks? How do we respond to this terrifying ordeal that's morphed into really a question of one's role in society? the most heart-wrenching sign that I've seen as someone who's covered virtually every protest and asked the governor dozens of times to, about his quote-unquote approach to this mess that's been created, is the term from hero to zero. And a lot of people feel like that because, ironically, about a month or so ago, there was a water fire. And if you're not from Rhode Island, it's hard to explain, but there's this crisscross of rivers downtown, and they set up these funeral pyres, if you will, in the middle, and they play ethereal music. It's a big deal. At its height, tens of thousands of Rhode Islanders and guests would be outside of them. And there arose a tradition where some were, dedicated to, well, one of the most poignant ones was, of course, every year, the Gloria Gemma Breast Cancer Foundation. Well, this year they decided to have one that would honor healthcare workers, the heroes, while at the same time twisting up these people's lives as if it was crumbled paper. Natalie Simmons joins us tonight. She's the founder of Essential Embrace, and I met her at one of these public events / actions / protests. And a lot of different groups had a lot to say, but I found her approach to this intriguing. Essential Embrace and is the goal, and I'll just say loosely from one of their social media posts, is to provide a space of solace and grace for essential workers who are suffering emotionally right now and are facing the fear, now realized in many cases, of being displaced. So she joins us tonight. We're going to talk about self-care and emotional health. I'm going to let her do most of the talking because folks who know me understand that I'm probably not very good at those things. But Natalie, thank you for joining us. And as importantly, thank you for understanding and realizing that there's an entirely different side to this issue that has little to do with, if you will, the politics of the situation, little to do with the science of the situation, but there's a real need for people who have found themselves under just this enormous whiplash of stress over the last year and a half, that these folks have needs. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I am not political at all, or I wasn't before this. Definitely not an activist. And I met you at my first rally and was not expecting for you to wave me down to ask me to come on the show. So that's awesome. It's an honor to be here and to talk about, what I've been doing since this whole forced mandate, kind of like it's this or your job.
Right. Well, tell us first a little bit about you and your background and how you've brought this all together. Tell us if you will, yours and the Essential Embrace story.
So I was working at the hospital as a mental health worker. I've been in the behavioral mental health field for about 27 years now. And I've done a lot of different things, worked with like highly therapeutic students in public schools and private schools. I ran an alternative learning program actually when I was 22, and my students were up to 21. And it was for, students that were having difficulty, a lot of behaviors, getting kicked out of school for, fighting, getting suspended, things like that. I have owned 2 daycare centers. I've worked in early intervention, therapeutic foster care, so kind of across the gamut in large nonprofits and, leadership roles and different things. And I just always loved, what I do. I love helping people. I've been getting into coaching now because I realized I coach everybody for free. I always have, just like I always took care of everybody's kids for free. So, comes to a point where why not capitalize on it? And then I don't know if you want me to go into the story of how, Essential Embrace came about, or if you have any other questions.
Well, in your role as a mental health worker, were you hospital-based or were you?
Yes.
Okay. And
yes, I work directly with patients.
Okay. So you were hospital-based at the time of the onset of the dread COVID.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, direct
So,
care, working with a very high risk population too, because a lot of my patients would come in and they were from congregate living, or they were homeless, and obviously not taking precautions as, um, they were, coming in for substance use or not on their medications or different things. And actually, I contracted COVID at the end of last year while I was at
oh,
work.
oh, um, how, if you don't, without, I don't want you to divulge any personal details, but how severely were you hit by it?
Luckily, I wasn't one of the, super hard hit ones. A lot of other people, I think, had maybe a little bit more symptoms than I did. I didn't get the loss of smell and taste, which is why I didn't think I really had it. Kind of felt just more like a flu. A lot of fatigue, though, for like at least a couple of weeks following that, like 2 to 3 weeks following that.
Oh, oh. So
So,
you're right there, if you will, at ground zero. You're deep in the heart of it. You saw firsthand the type of conditions that these folks were working under. Give us a little description of what you saw on wards in terms of PPE, in terms of the stress level. And again, I'd rather not identify where you worked, but I want you to reflect on it, particularly as someone who's got a background in mental health. I mean, you were, as they might have said back in the 50s, you were literally there in the catbird seat. You could see it all, both as just someone working alongside your comrades, your coworkers, and your friends, but at the same time, you could also, I would imagine, have a little bit of an out-of-body experience as someone who's a mental health care worker.
yeah, a big problem for me being at the hospital, and even being in, excuse me, a lot of these mandate groups was watching and taking that step back, like you said, and like just looking at what was going on and how people were being treating other people, how people were just, not coping well at all and still are not, which is, well, I'll talk about how essential embrace came to be. But even, when I was at the hospital working with coworkers who, were doing a lot of overtime, super stressed, scared, like scared. I remember a nurse talking to me and I forget what she said. She said something and like she literally just backed up, like in fear that she might get sick. There was a shortage of PPE, obviously. We had construction workers and stuff. Like I remember one day I was walking in and this guy in a pickup truck just pulls up to me and he was like, "Please, can you please just take this in? I want to donate." And he had, some masks. They weren't they weren't like our N95s that we were supposed to have, but they were, something that was better than just a paper mask. So a lot of people like, tried to donate gloves and different things. And again, they weren't of the quality that they should have been for us to be able to use at the hospital level, but there was a shortage everywhere in the country. So, we had to do what we had to do. We were given one N95, which technically you're supposed to use it. And as far as I'm understanding, throw it away when you're done, get another one. Because it can be contaminated. And we had a brown paper bag that we had to, slide it in and out of and keep it for the entire
Oh,
COVID season. we now, like, before I was terminated, we now just like in the last few months are able to like get new ones and they're like readily available.
right. That's insane when you think about it. The for folks to have been placed in that position by medical organizations who spend an enormous amount of money and time working in conjunction with governmental organizations to plan for and to war game for lack of a better term, and uh, to budget for and to all of that. I just and again, I worked in one of the toughest parts of a hospital. I was a linen orderly at an inner city hospital in the 70s, well before there were trauma centers and nursing homes and all this stuff, it was exactly as you imagine, and we had ample support. Particularly as we, back then it was right before the onset of the HIV crisis. So the notion that all these medical organizations were caught flat-footed, even though all this money and funding had gone into planning for, crazy airport. You see the people on the airport tarmac. You see, what happens if people get bubonic plague? Well, we saw a lot of flaws in the system. Without diving into the category of just being a voyeur, how did folks deal with that? It's not like a gunshot wound. It wasn't something you could see or feel or taste or touch. This was the complete unknown. Particularly early on, there wasn't even really any testing devices available. How did people react to that type of constant stress and that constant fear?
I think everybody reacted different. I tend to take a lot of things in stride, a lot more calm than a lot of people because I've been through a lot of stuff in life, I think, just in general, that I'm much more resilient. And that was kind of the interesting thing. There was a lot of people who really never had their cage like rattled, you know what I mean? And now, like, ever in their life for the most part. And now it was rattled and they had no idea what to do. They were, like I said, just scared. I remember a woman pulling up with her daughter in the ambulance bay in the beginning because the media, was just, constantly like telling us like, this is deadly. It's a pandemic, people are going to die. And this woman pulled in with her daughter who was probably like a tween, she was like a preteen. And she was hysterically screaming in the ambulance bay, which you're not supposed to pull into. And, we're trying to tell her she needs to move her car. And she was convinced that her and her daughter had COVID and that they were going to die. Like, that's how scared she was. It was heart-wrenching. And at the same time, kind of made me angry because I have my feelings about it. Obviously, it's real. A lot of people, did get COVID, were affected by COVID. I know some long haulers, that still have their symptoms a year or so later. But the hype and the just everything that they put out there to constantly, remind people and scare them like out of their wits was very disturbing for me, as a mental health worker. So I just wish they would have maybe thought about it and done things differently. And honestly, we were literally just hired at the end of 2019, mental health workers in the hospital, because they finally saw that there's a need for the other side of it, and again, working at a hospital and seeing their complete focus on medical and disregarding the mental health part of it, because that's not what they do, right? It was very eye-opening, very shocking, and let's just say that the world, society, organizations, hospitals needed a whole lot more mental health within their walls, helping to take care of people, patients, students, whatever it is. And now looking back, I can remember in all of the programs that I was in, working with students, working with therapeutic foster care, early intervention, there was really never that piece.
Right.
And I don't know why. It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, and if you, again, so many of the folks that I know that work in hospitals and on those front lines, there's various ways that they sometimes self-medicate, sometimes don't, smoke, find ways to somehow exercise is obviously one of the healthier aspects of it. But you're talking about people putting into short of outright combat, some of the most extreme situations that we've seen in what I'll call domestic America in its history. You'd have to go back to the wars, or someone who was enlisted in the United States military, to find a near level of stress that first responders were reacting to. And I'm speaking generically here. I don't want to accuse one institution of anything, but were any accommodations made for health workers at that moment in time for the type of stress that they might have been dealing with at the workplace? How did the large organizations support their workers?
I think a little bit later on in the process, they started to, put out, like, there's this number you can call if you, want to talk to somebody. I can't say they didn't do anything, but it wasn't really, marketed very well. It wasn't like really, put out there. It wasn't explained. It was just kind of like, here's an email, here's a number, if you want, you can call and there's somebody that you can talk to. But no, no real, like, just looking, no assessment of, like, is this person okay? No check-ins, as far as, like, and I was in the ER at the time too. They call it the ED, but I'm saying ER because a lot of people don't know what the ED is. So I don't know that was possible. I don't know if it was possible for the supervisors and the people and the managers to be worrying about that because of the COVID crisis. I mean, there was days, so we ended up going out to help in the front because there was, a lot of left without being seen, and because we had an influx of, people in the back, and then we didn't have beds for them to go up to, or to go to, like, say, another facility, like a psychiatric facility. So they had us out in the front trying to keep people there. And that was probably one of the, first times that I saw it, that was like, we really need you guys to kind of calm their anxiety and, frustration, and keep them here. To that, I'll say, again, kind of makes me mad because it all comes down to numbers. It comes down to insurance. It comes down to, like, payment. And I understand, they had to make money to stay open and whatnot. But if that's the only reason that you are providing these services is because you're losing people, and that's the only time that you realize that this is something that's needed and that we should put it in place, then, that's just not, in my mind, it's not okay.
One of the least discussed aspects of this was by definition, separation. Many healthcare workers, particularly frontline workers, self-inflicted because of their fear, and this is particularly true in the first 5 or 6 months, of the unknown potential for taking it home and transmitting it to their immediate family members. You had the state instituting dormitory space for healthcare workers. You had folks coming home after perhaps a double, going right down to the basement, taking a shower outside or something, and then staying literally within earshot of their family members, while at the same time not daring to go see them because, again, no one knew. Again, I sound like one of those really, cliched sports announcers. How does that feel? But what type of impact did you see that have on moms and dads?
So a young girl that I worked with, good friend of mine, she's a little bit younger than me. She has 3 small boys, and the youngest at the time, I think, was just about, it was 2. Mm-hmm. So I think they were like 2, 4, and, 6 or something, or 7. And, she's married and she worked all the time. So she's constantly picking up, overtime and stuff like that to provide for her family. And she actually got COVID a couple of times. And in the beginning, when they didn't know, what to do and how to keep it from spreading, or, whatever. She literally had to for, I mean, I think it was almost a couple of weeks, because they were quarantining at that time 14 days. She had to stay away from her family. She was distraught. She was, I mean, those were her babies. And she couldn't come to work, which is what she did every day, and she overworked herself all the time. So to not be able to work and be around anybody, your friends, your coworkers, and then to have your family taken out of your home and have to go stay with, like her husband stayed with the mom and the kids, and she could talk to them on the phone, and that was it. And I mean, that just killed her. It was terrible.
I
She's got her
can't.
2-year-old crying, like, I want my mommy, like, she just wants to be
Oh,
tucked in, and she's crying, heartbroken, she can't be there. And, of course, she didn't want to do anything to infect anybody because, again, we didn't know. So she stayed away. And, I actually talked to her, at points and times through that, and messaged her and checked in with her because I knew how upset she was about it. And, I was worried, that she wasn't going to be okay.
right. It's absolutely brutal. So this again, and I'm not saying that I don't want to have this conversation just to be a voyeur. But it's important that folks get some sense of what people were surrounded by. So if I can do a synopsis, you had these folks who pre-COVID were often working extended hours. You go back just a handful of years, and there were some major nursing strikes because of staffing issues and work hours and forced overtime that had led to some fairly serious safety issues and questions at the major hospitals. And this was before COVID. Now you've got folks who, you're seeing folks retire from healthcare. You're seeing folks from stepping away as this began. And then you had a difficult job made near impossible, separated from their families, surrounded by pain and very often death. And yet, I can't even begin to imagine having known so many nurses, for example, in my life, from my mom for whatever. There's a real guilt often associated with the inability to respond physically and work long enough to support their patients, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah. I, I can't even explain what COVID did to a lot of people. I'm an optimist, so I think there's a lot of good things that came out of it,
Mm-hmm.
but probably not for a lot of people. Um, as far as like community and people getting back to the basics of, like, there was no oil because people were baking and different things like that, but the isolation was horrific. I mean,
Right.
you couldn't go out to eat, you couldn't go out after a certain time. Even when you were home, you're like supposed to, like, kind of keep, like, I work at the hospital, so I'm supposed to keep my distance and not
Right.
really be around my family and my friends, because God forbid I could infect them. And a lot of the nurses just, they wouldn't go to anything, any holidays with their families or anything, because they were afraid, that they didn't want to get anybody sick. And then in the other end of it, you had the family members who were like, you're not, we don't want you here because you work at the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So it was tough, it was difficult. And I'm glad that you're talking about this stuff, because now, like you said, from hero to zero, now we got people who are like, why are you being stubborn? Like, why don't you just get the vaccine? Like, what is your problem? Why would you willingly put other people at risk and things like that? And
Mm-hmm.
what I can say to that is, there's always more than one side, right, to the
Right.
story, to what you're hearing in the media, especially, and things like that. But then there's also, you weren't there. You didn't
Right.
experience what we experienced. Like, you don't know all the, stuff that went on that was so unsafe. And so now the fact that, I have immunity because I had COVID, and I know I do because I was literally just around two people, one in my house who had it, and I didn't get it. And I did not get the vaccine. So, there's that natural immunity, and I got it last year, like a year ago. Um, But, it needs to be talked about because people don't understand. Like, it, we're not just being stubborn. We're not just refusing to do something just for the kick of it. There's a lot more behind it. There's a lot of things that we experienced, that we saw, that we're unsure of. And here's the crazy thing is that I have a lot of coworkers who decided to get it because they had to provide for their families. So do I. But it just didn't sit well with me, and I just chose not to. But the ones who have, I mean, I have a young girl, another young mom, two kids, and so she got it because she knew she had to keep her job, and she's a CNA, and I mean that's her skills and that's what she's got, and she works again all kinds of overtime to provide for them, and you know, she contacted me at like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning because like a lot of these people in these groups or just in general are up, they can't sleep, and
Right.
she wasn't okay. She's kind of freaking out. Like, what if something happens to me now with all this other stuff coming out that I got the vaccine, and what if something happens to me? Like, I'm the only one for my kids. Like, I'm the only one who
Right.
takes care of them. And even just people talking about having like they don't feel like they're in control of their lives or their body because they did something that they really didn't want to do, but they felt like they had to. Like, so the choices were like, which is the worst choice? You know what I mean? And it's bad for all of us. It's bad for me because now I don't have an income or a job, and it's bad for them because now they're still scared, and they're saying you can still spread it and you can still contract it, you know, even if
Hmm.
whether you do or you don't have the vaccine. So there's so many unknowns to it. There's just so much controversy around it, and
Right.
I don't think anybody's okay. Like, I don't think anybody is totally okay with any part of it, to be honest with you, one way or the other. I mean, we had people come through, like I said, my unit who would normally never be there. They were former NPs, doctors, lawyers, people that, like I said, in their lives, yeah, they may have come across different things and, coped in different ways, but this was just pushed so many people over the edge.
If you could, too, because I want to make sure we have enough time for you to discuss the services you're offering. And by the way, if you're just joining us, Natalie LaRoche is with us. I happened to meet her at, if you will, a protest, a rally. She's the founder of Essential Embrace. She is an accredited social worker, someone who was part of the support community before and then very much during the very worst, the darkest days and nights of COVID. And she has set up a business that will, and we'll discuss this in just a minute or two, provide some really great services and a support community for folks who find themselves in, we're calling it the hero to zero, if you will, whirlwind, particularly folks who are threatened with and or in now cases have been separated from their employer because of issues surrounding the vaccine. Can you speak to just for a minute, and I know you could speak to this for an hour, but the connection that healthcare workers make with their patients, and this could be whether it's in a hospital setting, some type of other facility, it could be for the legion of home healthcare workers who literally at the height of this went into people's homes and provided very intimate services in terms of personal care to people who are desperately ill to begin with before COVID. Talk about that connection.
Um, well, I have some controversy around that too. As a mental health worker, like I said, stepping into a medical like field, and this goes on everywhere. I mean, this was in other organizations that I worked for as well. The lack of connection, let's just say. Um, but there are a lot of great people out there that just wanted to be there for them, to hold their hand, to make them feel better, to accommodate them and care for them the best way that they could in all of the muck and the mess. And it was really hard because you have call lights going off left and right, and patients are just like wanting things, and it was always short staff, like you said, even before COVID. God bless the people who are still there now with, from what I've heard, like hundreds of people who have been let go. Yeah, and I know they're filling the gaps with travel people and different things and stuff like that, because they were doing that during COVID too, when everyone was out with COVID. But it's just not the same. Like I have talked to several, of my coworkers who are still there, and they're like, it's just terrible. Like there's so many new people, all those a lot of the old friends are gone. Even the ones that are still here, like they're all disconnected. Like this just did a lot of damage to a lot of people, a lot of relationships, a lot of trust, and so what do you think that's doing for the patients? Like if they were having trouble before because they were stressed, to accommodate them in the best way, not be short with them, right? Because they're exhausted because they just did like, two double shifts or whatever, or worked 60 hours already in 3 or 4 days. Um, so because they weren't taking care of themselves and their mental health, right? They weren't able to provide the best services for their patients.
Right.
And you'll probably hear from a lot of people, and working at the hospital, they'll say like people don't have the best bedside manner, right? And I can agree. However, now being in that environment, not on the other side, like being there with my mother, like wondering why all these nurses are ignoring us and walking by, or I'm standing there at the desk and they're not even acknowledging me. Now I have a better understanding as to why and what goes on again in the background, that you
Right.
don't see. When you're at the emergency room and everyone is totally pissed off and they're all complaining and they're like, I've been waiting here for this many hours. Yeah, it's a real problem across the state.
Yep.
People are not
Across
moving.
the nation.
They're not moving to the beds. They're not moving to the facilities. They're there. So if we have, say, 60, beds in the ER, but 30 of them are filled with boarders, we only have 30 spots to take people in, and there's, 70 people waiting.
Right.
So again, for people who are on the outside who don't know, you don't know what you don't know, but know that I would never want to be a nurse. God bless them. And my job was even hard. I was actually not a social worker. I was a direct care mental health worker. So I would
Okay.
either be in that special unit with, 10 to 13 people. And let's just say what an experience, because they're coming in left and right. They're coming and going. The police are bringing them. The ambulance are bringing them in. They're getting brought in from the front triage. Like it's insane. Then I started to work on the floors, and I was doing more one-on-one, sitting with, patients who were maybe suicidal, psychosis, a risk that they might like try to, elope because they're not in their right state of mind and things like that.
Mhm.
But it can be very, very stressful. And
Right.
I liked what I did because I was able to give them that care that they needed that they weren't getting. And actually, while I was there too, I tried my best to model and sort of coach without them realizing the staff that I worked with,
Hmm.
like definitely in my care unit. And then even on the floors, because people would come and they would be like, what do you do? Like, what do you do? You just sit here all day. And like,
Oh.
because I didn't do any of the medical stuff. Well,
Right.
because I didn't do any of the medical stuff. So, they're like, can you take the blood sugar? Can you take their vitals? Can you do this? Can you do that? And I'm like, no, I really can't because I'm not licensed for that, So, and
Right.
they're so short. Like, I didn't take it personally, because I understood that they needed those extra hands. And here I am sitting there with the patient, but I can't do any of those things for them.
Right.
And honestly, a lot of the times with my patients, I would talk to them, and it would be therapeutic, but I would joke with them. I would have a deep conversation with them, and I would just connect with them on a whole different level where like people would go by, we'd be laughing, and they would be all mad because it would be like, you get to sit in there and do this, and I have to do all this, and you can't even help. And and I felt really bad, but it was so needed. I mean, so many of my patients would just be like, thank you so much, you helped me so much, and I didn't do anything. I talked to you,
Right.
I connected with you, I listened to you. And that's the thing is I have this acronym that somewhere sometime is going to come into play. SOS, simple, obvious solutions.
Hmm.
There are so many simple, obvious solutions I have seen throughout all of my jobs and careers, and especially at the hospital that I actually was trying to implement. I was actually allowed to take part in the Care New England leadership development program, and it was a
Hmm.
10-month program that I did, at my own time, because I wanted to help to develop the mental health worker role and to
Hmm.
integrate it into the hospital so that people would know how to, read their patients and treat their patients and react to their patients, because it's difficult when you're working with a psychiatric population. They can be very, very difficult, and
Hmm.
if you don't know how to talk to them, how to approach them, or how to handle them, you only further, push them
Exacerbates the
towards.
situation.
Exactly. And I've
Right.
seen people get punched, slapped, spit on,
Right.
pushed, all kinds of things. And I've been in the field, like I said, for 27 years. And the only time that I ever had anyone put their hands on me was when I was working with like the little kids who were, in elementary school and stuff. Even the teenagers, I mean, they wanted to. They told me, they wanted to, and but they never did, because they knew there was like a mutual respect there and an understanding, and I think they just realized like I was really there because I really cared, and I used what I knew, the strategies and the techniques, to just keep them calm and to not you know do anything to amp up the situation.
Right.
Simple de-escalation, and just a lot of simple things. I also got certified to teach mental health first aid, which is CPR, like medical CPR,
Hmm.
but it's for mental health. So, they teach you how, in CPR and stuff, they teach you how to recognize signs of like a stroke or a heart attack, and, obviously the Heimlich maneuver and CPR and stuff like that. Mental health first aid is you're teaching people how to recognize people who are in distress mentally, maybe if they're suicidal, maybe if they're, in psychosis, and how to help to keep them stable until you get them help, or to assess them to see like, do they need to go to a psychiatric facility or a hospital? Are they okay? Do I just need to keep an eye on them? How do you talk to them and approach them? So I actually just did 3 classes in September for Wheaton College for all of their staff, from security to professors to librarians, and it's going to be spreading like wildfire. The police, the fire, all the essential workers. I
Hmm.
believe that it will and it should become mandatory.
Right.
So
Well, we've only got a couple minutes left. I want to make sure we spend at least a couple minutes. We have about 9 minutes. Tell us about uh, what your new organization does, and just as importantly, how folks can find you.
sure. So the new organization is under the umbrella of another nonprofit, and it's called Essential Embrace. You can find us on Facebook if you just look up Essential Embrace, and it is for all essential workers, vaxxed or non-vaxxed. It is for people who are working and not working, whether you're displaced or not, because as I mentioned, everyone is affected by this in all kinds of different ways. So everybody's welcome there. Um, and actually, it was just supposed to be a Facebook group for support. It came out of a 3 a.m. conversation in a thread on one of the mandate pages, and people were just making comments. And I can't sleep, and I haven't eaten, and I've lost 4 pounds. And I had seen over the weeks people talking about drinking too much and not sleeping, and just being scared and things like that. And of course, it was, probably why I was up at night, because it was just disturbing to me and I didn't really know what to do about it. And in that 3 a.m. conversation, a few people said things, and then me and another woman kind of said a couple things. And she said, we really need a support group for this. People need a support group.
Right.
And I just said, I would be willing to, create a Facebook group for that. And so she private messaged me. Next thing you know, the next day, I created the Facebook page and I started to just invite people from that thread, and then from, other comments that I would see. I would just like, either put it in the comment section, or I would private message them and say, hey, look, I just created this, support group for essential workers. You're more than welcome to join. Um, you know, Hopefully we can just kind of build a community there and support one another. Kind of just get them out of the chaos and the stress of the mandate groups.
Right.
And the day that I launched it, or the day after I launched it, another woman who was in the groups messaged me privately, and she said, I have a nonprofit. I've been wanting to help essential workers, and I'm also looking to grow my nonprofit. Are you interested? Yes, we talked. Literally, this all happened in a couple weeks, and by God's grace, I actually was out because of the COVID exposures, even though I get COVID for like 2 weeks prior to, and October 1st. And that's like from the 19th or the 20th to the 1st is when I kind of put all this together. And it's just grown like wildfire. So the nonprofit woman had some funds. She bought some shirts that we were going to wear to the rally, but they didn't come in time. And since then, she has gotten a grant. She was just given a $10,000 grant that she had put in for like last summer, and she said, "I'm willing to use this for whatever we need." So we've just been kind of collaborating and growing. The group is up to like I think 170 something now. And more people keep joining. We just did our first free yoga class. We did restorative yoga, and then I met with the people for like 2 hours after, and we just sat and we talked. I just kind of checking in with people, making sure people are okay. Spoke to another woman who has a civil rights group that I met at the rally, and now we're working together. She has space. She was like, if you want to come do some groups here. Next thing you know, like this Friday, we're doing a group for those that lost their jobs and are just distressed and just want to come talk and, just maybe get some coping skills. We're going to do another restorative yoga and group this Sunday. There's just a lot going on, and we just keep moving forward with it. And we've done like walks, like where if anybody wants to walk, you can come meet us here, or you can do it virtually. It's really hard to try to get people engaged and involved, and especially when they're so stressed. So it's just starting now to kind of build the momentum where people are trusting and are kind of a little bit beyond that spot where they couldn't even see what tomorrow was going to bring.
Well,
So
unfortunately, we're out of time, but I'm going to make a on the spot sort of invitation that you can think about. I'd love to have you back next Tuesday, as we say here, same bat time, same bat station. I'd like to give you an opportunity to continue the conversation in a forum like this. If on reflection this week this works for you. We've spent a lot of time as an organization with folks in a variety of aspects and reactions to as we call it here with a dark humor, the dread COVID. And I think you've touched a nerve. I think this is one of those situations where you've answered questions that people didn't even know they have. And when that happens, the community needs to come together and support it. So I'll toss that out to you, up to you, of course. And
thank you.
in the meantime, I'd like to continue the dialogue. But in the minute or two we've got left, just tell folks how they can find you.
So like I said, I'm working with a nonprofit, which is called Integrative Health Solutions, which is IHRS on Facebook. That's the nonprofit that we're working under. But to get into the group Essential Embrace, you just type in Essential Embrace, and you can like answer the questions and just get into the group. And there's actually a lot of people that are in the mandate groups and whatnot, and because people have been just coming in, I haven't even been inviting anymore. They just keep coming. But everybody's, like I said, welcome. You can also find me, Natalie Simmons LaRoche, on Facebook, and feel free to message me if you have any questions, before you join or about the group. But I do appreciate the invite to come back next Tuesday because, like I said, we have a few more programs that we're running and some more things that are kind of going on in the background that I'd like to talk about and put out there and just let people know, what we're really doing, what our intent is now that it's actually an organization. It was just supposed to be a free support group. And right now, all of our programs are free. We're not charging anybody for them. And we're just, like I said, flying by the seat of our pants and going on God's grace and believing that the funds will come. I mean, we already got a $10,000 grant within the first week when we weren't even trying, and we're actively looking for other grants and be doing some fundraising and stuff to continue to provide services for free for people, because that's just a stress that we don't want them to have to worry about. We want them to be able to so the premises of it is self-care for healthcare, which has needed to happen forever, right? And so it's just a good time to start it in all of this. But healthcare workers and essential workers, first responders, they need to take care of themselves.
Natalie LaRoche, she is the founder of Essential Embrace. You're right. All you have to do is go up onto the Facebook and the search bar, just put Essential Embrace and a handful of questions, and you'll be joining sort of a new family, a growing family of folks who understand that self-care and mental health care is critical. We, sometimes even for selfish reasons, in the sense that we need all of you. We really, really, really do. And despite the ingratitude,
the world needs us to be well, right?
We really, really do. So it looks like we have another bat time, same bat station next week at about 8-ish here on Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. And thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for the invite. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the time.
No, and again, continue to share with us the events you're having. We'll display them and also direct you, if you will, right to Essential Embrace so that you can join up and find some well-deserved peace during these turbulent times. Natalie, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night.
Thank you, Pat. You too.
Good night now.
Hello.